Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of February 2016, and I'm smiling because this is definitely a just-in-time delivery.
Well, late.
Final setup. So welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Mike Robinson, and we're going to be joined by live video Skype link by John Hurst from the British Constitution Group, who's going to be bringing us up to date with, amongst other things, the huge reserves held at the moment by our local authorities. Well, before we get there, a brief comment on the weather. I've got to say it's glorious here in Plymouth. We've got totally blue skies. It's a little bit chilly, but pretty good. And reports are that it's also sunny in parts of Wales. That's as far as the weather goes at the moment, so I think we'll leave it there. Well, if the sun is shining, of course, we've got very dark matters at hand with the approaching EU referendum. We are saying, and we're going to continue to say, that David Cameron is running a cross-party EU referendum psyop. This is a massive propaganda campaign, which we say is essentially to deceive the British public into accepting control by the European Union. Mike?
Yes, so this morning the letter was published in the Times. Here it is, published apparently purporting to come from 198 business leaders, FTSE 100 business leaders. Here's what it says. You can read it for yourselves if you would want to stop the video on the archive. But basically suggesting that we need to stay in. Now, one question that perhaps should be asked straight away is what right these business leaders have to make any kind of comment. What do they know about economy, growth, running businesses? Apparently nothing, as can be demonstrated from the FTSE 100 since 1998. That seems like a pretty downward trend to me. They're not doing a terribly good job, pretty successful. But unfortunately for David Cameron, Guido Fawkes yesterday exposed that the source of the letter, the source of the text of the letter was a certain Chris Hopkins, who Guido Fawkes said was a civil servant. Now, of course, civil servants are not permitted to take part in any kind of political campaigning. So when Cameron presented his best of both worlds deal, as he's calling it, to the Commons yesterday, it was Nadine Dorries who asked David Cameron who Chris Hopkins is. And being king, after all, Dave was not flustered because he knows he has the divine right to do as he pleases. And so here's what he said when Nadine Dorries asked who Chris Hopkins was. David Cameron said this: "He's a civil servant working in Number 10, and his authority comes from me." Well, the arrogance of it was unbelievable.
That says it all. It mirrors the arrogance actually in Tony Blair's autobiography, which he says he's read other books, but you put them down, but he's written a real book on leadership.
Right.
It's exactly the same arrogance, Mike, between these men.
So he went on to say the government's view is that we should remain in a reformed European Union and the civil service is able to support the government in that role. That seems like bending the rules to an extreme.
Well, he's done something more, Mike, hasn't he? Because what he's done is completely politicised the civil service, which historically, okay, not perfect, but historically the civil service was supposed to remain apolitical. And now what we've got is the full weight of the civil service being used to promote the pro-EU campaign, which of course is what Dave Barmby has been speaking on, and we're going to be speaking on a lot more.
So here it is, the best of both worlds, the United Kingdom's special status in a reformed European Union. So let's have a look through it. And well, just before we do that, actually, here he was this morning tweeting out, because he mentions this term in the foreword to that document, the alternative is a leap in the dark. I would quite like to see David Cameron take a very long leap in the dark into a long, dark, deep hole. But anyway, of course, he's then going on to tweet about the business leaders. But anyway, here's the report again, and so let's have a look through some of this. I've only had a sort of quite a
Cursory
cursory
look.
look so far, but I think this needs to be looked at in depth. Here's the first bit. During negotiations on the Maastricht Treaty agreed in 1992, the UK secured a permanent opt-out from joining the euro. This opt-out has been maintained. So Brian, perhaps you could explain this one to me, because I can't understand. Was it permanent or was it not permanent? And if it wasn't permanent, what does permanent mean? Because it's been maintained.
Of course, it's been maintained because the whole thing works on a ratchet agreement, which is that the ratchet, the noose keeps tightening. So there's no question as an opt-out unless you come out of the thing completely.
Yes, but it's the issue of the word permanent, because how can you have permanent and then a maintenance of permanency? That's not possible. It's either permanent or it isn't, right? So anyway, let's go on. UK taxpayers will never be required to pay for Eurozone bailouts. Well, that's fine, but since the City of London is the biggest financial disaster on the planet, it also means that Europe will not help to bail that mess out either. So it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Well, this is also Cameron claiming that he's in control rather than the international bankers who clearly control him. So this statement can't be true.
Don't worry, there's much more to come. Currently, the UK exports more to Ireland than we do to China. We export almost twice as much to Belgium as we do to India. We export nearly 3 times as much to Sweden as we do to Brazil. So what he's admitting in this document is that we're missing a huge opportunity. I mean, what is the size of the economy of Ireland relative to the size of the economy of China? And we're exporting more to Ireland than we are to China. All this focus on the European Union and the so-called single market we're missing a trick as a result. So he's arguing against himself here. The next one, concluding all the trade deals already underway could ultimately be worth a total more than 20 billion a year to UK GDP. These include the UK's top trade priority, an agreement between the EU and the US, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which alone could add £10 billion to UK GDP. It will offer real blah-de-blah-de-blah. I'm not going to read the rest of that. But the point here is this referendum isn't just about the European Union. This referendum, therefore, is also about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And if you agree to stay within the EU, then you're also agreeing to TTIP. So this is something that the mainstream media isn't covering at all, and something that I think people need to understand. Then we go on to say, our new settlement means that it has been formally recognised for the first time that the UK is not committed to further political integration into the EU, and we have secured specific confirmation that the concept of ever closer union will not apply to the UK in future. This builds on the commitment in the European Union Act 2011, which makes it impossible for any UK government to transfer power to the EU in future without a referendum. Well, that's very interesting. It says they're not committed to, unless we commit ourselves. But we have to hold on to this weasel-worded government. Sorry, we have to hold this weasel-worded government to this point. Any transfer of power, no matter how small, needs a referendum, is what he's saying here. And I know that referenda are a scam, but imagine how long it takes to do anything if the government is held to this. So every time they attempt to push something over to Europe, there's a referendum. So then it goes on to say, national parliaments can combine to block unwanted EU legislative proposals where the power should not be exercised at the EU level, giving a stronger voice to the UK Parliament. So I'm not quite clear how it does that.
Well, this is weasel wording, isn't it, Mike? Because basically, if you're not strong enough to stand alone, you're admitting that you're incredibly weak because you need people to stand up with you against the European Union. So this statement to me is an admission of gross weakness by David Cameron.
Well, yes. Now, remember what we've just said there about a referendum for every little thing. Well, here we go. The need to preserve national sovereignty is a common concern of blah-de-blah-de-blah. I'm not going to read that, but here's the key point. The 2011 European Union Act ensures that everybody will get to vote on a referendum, but the UK has chosen to opt into EU measures on more than 90 occasions since 2009. So we're not going to transfer sovereignty without a referendum because we've got this new deal, which means that we don't have to do that unless we decide to do that for ourselves. There's no commitment from the EU to us, but we can decide to do it anyway. And he even then admits that they've done that on 90 occasions since 2009. So that whole piece is a load of nonsense as well, more weasel words. And the central element of the deal is that the government has secured an international law decision agreed by the heads of state or government of the member states of the EU. So this is an international law decision. And what's more, it's an irreversible international law decision. So what happened to Parliament, to no Parliament may bind its successors? This agreement is unconstitutional. All member states have to agree to any future amendment of the deal, and this ties us into the EU in a way that we haven't been tied in before. So in some ways, it's highly dangerous, particularly the fact that they are including things like TTIP in this referendum, which effectively means that if people consent to staying within the European Union, they're also consenting to a new form of governance, a communitarian, corporatist governance.
Very apt description, Mike. And of course, all of this simply decided by David Cameron behind closed doors. So absolutely no proper debate in Westminster. And I think there's a reason for that, which I might come on. Perhaps we should bring in John Hurst here, because there's certainly deep constitutional issues being raised in this agreement. John, are you with us?
Yes, well, the first point you made was about a civil servant telling the Prime Minister what to do. Well, apparently, if you remember the TV series Yes Minister, I'm sure that was quite true. So the way to look at it is the civil servants flexing their muscles rather than the other way around, perhaps. As far as the Constitution is concerned, Mike mentioned the common law rule: no Parliament may bind its successor. That's the classic rule that demonstrates that common law is superior to statute law. It's conveniently forgotten when politicians suit it. So it's the third thing to say is referendums unknown to the Constitution. Voting on unlawful action doesn't make it right.
So just for the sake of clarity with people who may have joined us, John, who are not fully up to speed on these sorts of issues, give us a statement on how you see David Cameron's agreement in relation to our Constitution.
When the Magna Carta Society was considering raising a petition under Article 61, Mike Burke and I read Hansard for the Single European Act 1972, quite a major task. And what we found was that assurances were given by politicians in Parliament that sovereignty wouldn't be affected, but in the background, senior legal advisors, the Attorney General, for example, were saying yes, it will, because so much time has gone by. The 30-year rule now applies, and even more papers have come out. So assurances made by politicians proved to be meaningless, and the law officers of the Crown were correct. Now, I've heard a rumour, and I haven't been able to research it presently, but the current Attorney General has also expressed doubts about the EU because it infringes our sovereignty. If that's the case, then the argument is legal, not political. The third one, of course, is that Edward Heath is a compromise, wasn't he, by his unpleasant activities, subject to blackmail by a German secret service, and the Vienna Convention on Treaties says that if a party to a treaty is being subverted by the other side, the whole thing's void. So you could say we're not in the EU anyway.
Right, if I can just thank you for that, but just push the point and test you a little bit. Of course, many people at the moment are actually saying, what should we do in this referendum? I've even had people say to me, how should I vote? Which wasn't particularly difficult answering, as much as I said, well, you should absolutely vote against the European Union. But are you saying that if we participate in this referendum, we're actually guilty of subverting our own constitution?
No, because the common law rule is that duress of circumstances means that our rights and liberties are being threatened. So duress of circumstances means that if we were to vote in the referendum, it wouldn't be an offence. As you know, in chivalry, you being an ex-military officer, in chivalry, there's no dishonour in yielding to overwhelming force. That's why soldiers can surrender at the last minute, and that would apply here as well. Okay. Subject to overwhelming force.
Okay, John, thank you for that. Well, you've provided a nice lead in to the subject of blackmail. Before we get on to blackmail, just have a look at this. UK Column has been given some very, very interesting information. Mike's talked about a business letter which has appeared in the press. More dirty deals going on from Number 10, and in particular the Cabinet Office. And this is around Lord Richards, former general and former chief of the Defence Staff. And basically his name was actually being used. This is what he said. I'll read that and then explain it. Timely, as I've just had to tell Number 10 to take my name off a letter they are drafting from a number of retired, very senior officers supporting the Remain in Europe cause. This is before we've even seen the deal. Now, this is a very polite couple of sentences here from Lord Richards, but I understand that he was particularly incensed that Number 10 has simply been choosing to use his name and the name of other people in order to promote their political agenda to stay in Europe. This is very dark, devious stuff going on. Now, we need to remind ourselves, of course, that thanks to Dave Barmby, the man who did the research into the dirty dealing going on around Ted Heath, who you've just mentioned, but this was part of a document from the 1970s in which it was basically saying there should be a campaign to undermine and discredit any MPs who dared speak out about the idea of going into the European Economic Community. And the bottom piece of text there was specifically saying that there was going to be a letter writing campaign to the press in order to subvert public opinion. So this is pretty nasty stuff. I'll just blow that up on screen so that people have got a chance to read it. It says at the bottom, when a campaign of letter writing to MPs by constituents must also be promoted. Well, they didn't mean constituents, because what was going to happen here is this was going to be deceptive and run by central government. And let's bring in David Cameron, because this links in with the letter you've just mentioned, Mike. And this is deceit and propaganda by David Cameron and his government in order to deceive the public into Europe. And of course, we've had further hints of this, or previous hints of this, because it was the Telegraph here that pointed out Cameron had said to wavering backbenchers, don't be swayed by what your constituency association might say, do what's in your heart. Well, my interpretation of that is that he's basically bullying and saying to these people, you better do what you're told. And this brings us nicely onto the subject of blackmail. And how do we blackmail people? Well, at the moment, if you're an MP, it's okay if you take a few drugs. It's okay if you have affairs, men, women, doesn't really matter. But one of the things that, of course, is not tolerated by the public is the abuse of children. So let's remind ourselves, this was UK Column Network that we put out. If we bring it up on screen, we were simply showing that the paedophiles in the establishment are in the same establishment and political circles that control the police and security services. And so there is a code of silence by members who are in the paedophile club. I encourage you to have a look at this diagram. I've tweeted it out previously. Well, let's remind ourselves, of course, that this man, former Conservative whip Tim Fortescue, is quoted in a BBC video saying, well, members of Parliament might come to us, the whips, with a scandal involving small boys, anything really. They would come and ask if we might help. And when the interviewer said, and why did you help? His reply was, because we could then rely on those members to help us. Now, what this is blackmail. It may be couched in very gentlemanly language. This is political blackmail. And so we know that the political system is prepared to hide information which is in our face, evidence in our face, that we have had paedophiles at the heart of British government for many years. That's all being swept under the carpet. And at the moment, it's all being played down. So we've got Esther Ranson here saying police should investigate current child abusers. You don't want to go near anything historic, Mike, because it could, of course, turn up some very embarrassing material for the British government. And here he is, of course, David Cameron, who says, well, we don't really want to investigate paedophiles in Westminster. Well, of course not, Mr. Cameron, because the aim of the game is to be able to use the child abuse to blackmail politicians into, for example, supporting a foreign power EU referendum. Am I coming on a bit strong here, John, or do you think we're looking into the heart of the beast? The paedophilia is clearly there. It's clearly being denied. There's got to be a reason for the cover-up.
You're intelligence trained, aren't you? So I respect your work, and you're being peer reviewed by the supporters of the column and the Constitution Group. And the test is, if people come to the same conclusion when they analyse the situation, then they're right. So what can we say?
Okay, well, while I was preparing the news, thank you for that. While I was preparing the news today, an email came through which I found fascinating. I'll just mention it very briefly, but I think there's some very interesting points. Here it is. It's come through from Care2 Petitions, and it was on the subject of child abuse. But here's the headline: Stop horrifying attacks on India's children and women. And it says 3 men raped a 5-year-old girl earlier this month, and there were other attacks. And then it says, whether she lives in Plymouth or New Delhi, no girl should face terror attacks like this. Now, I was fascinated by this organisation contacting me out of nowhere. I just had a little look at them, and what do I find? Well, I find a highly corporatist organisation backed by banks, which has suddenly popped up out of nowhere, with millions of members, and it's apparently bringing all the caring people in the world together. Well, I don't think so. I think we've got something rather muckier going on here, because we've got a corporate entity using guilt and compassion. We've got the World Wildlife Fund behind it, Mike, which I thought you may be interested in. Here they are. They also say they're very big on butterflies, and that if we've got enough people doing the right things, we can change the world for the better. Well, I think this is a scam. And of course, it was the UK column front page that pointed out the dangers of butterflies coming out of Theresa May's mouth here, for one example.
They represent transformation.
Transformation. The butterflies are an indicator of the policy to transform us into the New World Agenda, where, of course, we don't have to think. We simply have to believe and follow leaders such as David Cameron. Well, John, I think this brings us into you quite nicely, because, of course, you told us a few days ago about Anthony Carlin, the very brave Northern Ireland police officer who attempted to arrest a judge who he believed was committing crime. The result is he's now in prison. Can you give us an update on Mr. Carlin, please?
Well, I need to correct you. He did arrest the judge, because the case sort of say if a person's told they're under arrest and their locomotion is affected, then they're told they can't go, then they are under arrest. The fact that he was rescued by 3 court officials doesn't alter that. So, yes, he was arrested. The latest is he's been given 3 months imprisonment, which I think is the maximum for contempt. I could be wrong on that. He may get out within 6 weeks with a discount, 3% discount. He's been given an offer if he purges his contempt after 28 days, he'll be let out then. But I very much doubt he will. The issue is it's constable's rights versus courts' rights. They're both common law concepts. The court's established by common law and the constable's established by common law. The full weight of the legal profession in Northern Ireland, the Lord Chief Justice sat in his case and the Attorney General was defending. He held them at bay for about 8 hours over 2 sessions. And in the end, they went against the weight of the evidence. And what he was asking for is jury trial, in actual fact. It's a rare thing in Northern Ireland. You recall they've had diplomat courts. The latest is that his only avenue of appeal is to the Supreme Court in London to challenge the decision not to allow him to appeal. We're working on that. He's got a mainstream barrister because he's got legal aid, so he might as well. And the 2 issues that the barrister has expressed interest in, shall we say, are the exact wording of Magna Carta in relation to trial by jury, and when may means must. You've heard me talk about that, so I'll quickly say Magna Carta. The Latin word for and is et, And if you actually look at the original text of ET, if you look at the original text of Magna Carta 1215, it says that a person can only be penalised as a result of trial by jury, and it uses the word vel, the law of the land. And the mainstream, this barrister in particular, interprets that as two alternatives. You can be punished by a jury, or you can be punished by the law of the land. In actual fact, the correct interpretation of vel, it means and. So there are two alternatives, and what that refers to is the concept of before a person can be put in front of a jury, they have to be arrested, kept in custody, and then presented, and that's what it's about. We've got a number of textbooks that confirm that. So Anthony's raising trial by jury, and by spooky coincidence, the leading case on what the word "may" in a statute refers to is known as Mitchell against the King ex parte Livesey, it's 1850. And it's not being superseded. It's used in current cases. And what it says is when a word "may" in a statute is empowering, and it can mean must when it empowers a person to effectuate a right. So the policeman's power of arrest in Northern Ireland is basically common law, but there's not an act of Parliament, strange enough. There's an order in council which restates what's in the English Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and the section 26 of the Northern Ireland Police and Criminal Evidence Act order says a constable may arrest anyone. And we interpret "may" as means must, because the more serious the crime, the worse it is. And just to make clear, the crime that Anthony's accusing the judge of is this: it's identical to what happened with Judge Peake. A court may only make a decision based on evidence that's being put before it. If it departs from material which, based on evidence being put before it, it exceeds its authority, and that is what the judge did. Anthony heard him give his summon up, and he departed from the material and started making personal attacks on Anthony with a view to make him a vexatious litigant. And Anthony's argument is that's misconduct in office, treason, and from that point onwards, and that's when he arrested the judge. The evidence against him is 3 court officials, and they've all made statements, and they say, well, I was on duty in the court, the case had finished and they were discussing costs. Mr. Carlin produced what he said was a warrant card, and it was a warrant card, and told the judge he was under arrest and move towards him, and then I got in the way. All 3 of them. Now, anybody else did that, you can imagine what would happen, couldn't you? The judge scuttled out the back, complete with the case papers, because Anthony was going to seize the case papers, as he's entitled to seize evidence once he's made the arrest. All the law relating to constable's power of arrest appears not to have been considered by the judges. Anthony certainly raised it. He's well aware of his powers. He obviously planned this in advance. But the judge in the judgment against him didn't take it into account. Anthony was accused of an assault. Now, assault, as you know, is you don't have to hit somebody to assault them. You put them in fear of unlawful violence. One of the witnesses, in actual fact, said because it's Northern Ireland, they thought he might have a gun. Well, he didn't, because he left it at home. But there we are. So a whole body of law has been disregarded. And the first principle, the first article in the Bill of Rights says the Crown may not suspend laws or the effects of laws, and that's what they've done. So that's going to be the basis of appeal. Right to trial by jury and constable's powers. Now, the constable's power of arrest is the same in Northern Ireland as it is here. There's a power, and there are certain limitations, and one of the limitations is the arrest can only be made when it's necessary to investigate an offence or the conduct of the person concerned. So the 2 things. Now, you don't investigate a judge for an offence, because since 1701, the Act of Settlement, judges have immunity. They can only be dismissed by a vote of both houses of Parliament. So Anthony didn't arrest him in order to investigate a crime. He arrested him in order to investigate his conduct, and he would have sent a report to a tribunal of the Northern Ireland Judicial Appointments Commission, which has got power to investigate judicial misconduct. And if they agreed the judge was out of order, they would recommend that Parliament be sacked. So interestingly enough, in Northern Ireland, they have an ombudsman service that investigates police complaints. They've investigated the complaints. They've been fully briefed on this stuff, because I made sure they were, and they've left Anthony alone. They haven't rebailed him. There's no case to answer as far. It would appear there's no case to answer as far as the ombudsman is concerned. So the chief constable's now got a problem, and the problem is three or four of his constables who were called to the court by the court staff did the wrong thing. They arrested Anthony rather than back him up. So we're working on an alternative course of action against those constables. They may be ignorant, but there's no excuse of the law as far as an official is concerned. They should have should have done their duty, and they didn't. And the chief constable, of course, is vicariously liable. So that's where it stands. There's still an outstanding application for leave to appeal, but there's going to be a counter action against the constables that arrested Anthony, because that's where it's probably wrong.
Okay, thank you, John.
John, where does this leave Anthony as far as his role within the police goes?
There has to be a discipline hearing, and if a policeman convicted of something like perjury, he'd have to go, because you can't give evidence in court from that point onwards, because everybody will say you've got conviction of perjury. He's been accused by the judge of exceeding his authority, so I'm sure they could determine that that's a sacking offence, but that hearing will be challenged as well. So it's another bite at the cherry. And the third issue is that this is in fact a sideshow from the matter of Anthony's house. As you recall, Anthony was able to demonstrate that Santander didn't lend him any money, told lies about not selling the mortgage to the SPV when they had, and got caught out. And this is a sideshow, because this issue was to do with Anthony made an application that the corrupt lawyers be sent to prison for contempt of court for starting a hearing without good reason. So I've been assured by people on the other side of the water that the matter of Anthony's house is basically won. It awaits a judgment to be handed down.
Okay.
Now the other side may not agree with that, and they may try and take his house away while he's in prison, but there's no sign of that yet.
Okay, John, thank you very much for that. The other subject that you wanted to cover was to give us an update on money within local authorities. I've just got a few slides which I'll just run through very quickly. These are articles that you did for UK Columns, Section 151 Officer, Council Tax and Fraudulent Accounting. You've got the truth about the raising of council tax. These were back in summer last year. And then, of course, we've had some very interesting press releases where it's been admitted. This one, I haven't got a date on this. It meant 2013. It says latest figures confirm councils have now amassed 19 billion. Remember, we're told there's no money, but they've got 19 billion pounds in reserves. And the latest figure you've told us is here at 22 billion. Somebody is lying somewhere over money in local authorities, it would appear.
Indeed, Nigel Coleman, fair play to him, has taken up the torch as far as council tax is concerned, because I've been busy, and he's an ace researcher. He's got a very good memory. He's got a huge IQ, and he's found out lots of good stuff. For example, he sent me a message about the Attorney General has in fact raised doubts about the validity of the EU, but I'll send you that separately. So it goes like this. It appears that for the last 30 or 40 years, large amounts of taxpayers' money, both local and national, has been invested abroad in things like derivatives, I dare say. So much so that if the taxpayers were to get the interest, they wouldn't need to pay tax anymore. Local authorities would be self-sustaining. This has all been hidden, and the way it's hidden is when a local authority sets its budget each year, it chooses a figure, but it doesn't mention to the punters, the taxpayers, how much it's got in reserve. So you gave the example of Paris, didn't you? This year, Paris has got 379 million in reserve, but they're still making 27 million cuts, and they're still claiming 60 million council tax as well. So I say that's fraud, and the reason is the no representation, no taxation without representation concept that was settled by the petition right in 1627. Taxation can be only raised by the Crown with common consent, and it's not because if there isn't full disclosure of the true facts, then there can't be common consent. So what Nigel has done is written an article which you've got, I'm sure, and you can circulate, and he's suggesting that there's been new legislation to do with council tax. Now, I wasn't aware of it because the legislation.gov.uk was remiss and didn't publish it. Now, we now discovered it the hard way by Nigel's got an action against his local council, and this new legislation dates back to 2013. It came into force, and there've been a number of judgments based on it. What they say is local authorities must consider applications for discount for any good reason, and that's what we've been saying all along. The mistake apparently is based on a notes for guidance for the 2012 Act, which are a bit garbled. So now we know this. We're encouraging people to do the research which is specified in the articles. find out how much money your council actually got, locate identified unusable reserves. They call them unusual, and see how much they're cutting, and compare the two. So Paris took 379 million reserve and 27 million cuts. Very hard to justify.
John, thank you very much for that. It's very timely because I know Mike's going to move on to cities. Just before he does, just to tell you that in the chat box, somebody has said, well, they did a freedom of information to their local council on this subject, and they were told that that council, I'm afraid I don't know which one it was, but that council has 63 million in reserves. So we have lying about public money. We've got the public being denied their own money. Meanwhile, Mike, cities are being made city-states.
Indeed. Now, this is quite interesting because Common Purpose, it looks like Common Purpose, the organisation, has sort of changed its tack a little bit. It's making itself more publicly visible. So here we've got the Common Purpose Challenge, and this is in partnership with Comic Relief. And a few weeks ago, we mentioned, I think it was just before Christmas, we mentioned the fact that Common Purpose was offering a free course for anybody that wanted to take part. So they're breaking their normal invitation-only rule. So Common Purpose seem to be taking this much more public role. And of course, right at the heart of their agenda is cities. So here's the Common Purpose Challenge. It's all about generating ideas to improve your city. So in other words, we've got to buy into the city-state infrastructure, city-state feudalism. And of course, it's not just city-state feudalism that we're talking about here, because it's smart city-state feudalism. So this is an article from Digital Economy Minister Ed Vizi, published yesterday, the day before, on the subject of smart cities. And he's saying this government is breaking new ground and devolving power to local people. This provides fantastic opportunities for cities to thrive, especially as smart cities. Data analytics, building information management, and intelligent mobility are all part of the mixture for smart cities. So too is the Internet of Things, whereby devices, vehicles, buildings, and other items are embedded with electronics, sensors, and software that have network connectivity, enabling them to collect and exchange data and to make public services far more efficient. And he ends by saying, we're looking into the future too. The Government Office for Science's Future of Cities project looks at scenarios for UK cities up to the year 2065. The Open University's free 6-week online course on smart city concepts helps people here and around the world understand the opportunities. The Future Cities Catapult has identified more than 32,000 companies in the UK that are offering solutions for the smart cities market. UK expertise in architecture and urban design already contributes £16 billion and 400,000 jobs to our economy, so our potential is enormous. By 2050, he says, by 2050 more than 7 billion people will live in urban areas. The UK's smart cities can be an inspiration and global leader, back to the Common Purpose again, in shaping places to live. Of course, let's also not forget that every minute that we're being distracted with the EU referendum PSYOP, they move ahead with their devolution programme and devolution to cities and more power to mayors. So this agenda never sleeps, Brian.
It never sleeps because it is the agenda, Mike, and it's the agenda which they are going to ram through no matter what people say. The sad thing at the moment, of course, is many people are not saying anything because they're simply not aware of the agenda in the first place. But I learnt over the last few days that apparently it's planned for Plymouth's population, which I believe is about 238,000 at the moment. That's going to balloon to well over 300,000, and some people are now talking about 400,000. Why would this be? Because there is a structural plan to make Plymouth the city-state of the southwest of UK. More on that in due course, but John, just a very quick one. Of course, one of the things that we see is that politicians both in UK and America are terrified with members of the public who may have access to guns. What's in this BBC story here?
I need to eat humble pie. I don't go on Facebook, but I have conversed with this chap on his YouTube channel. He announced he was going to be interviewed by the BBC, and I said, do you think they'll give a favourable report? And he said, I'll find out. And he was proved correct, because in actual fact, Brian, as a connoisseur of these things, this is a favourable report. It's quite dazzling for a BBC reporter to do it. The last major report I saw, for example, was by a woman reporter for a Sunday paper, The Observer, I think. Went down to the National Rifle Association at Bisley, was entertained for the day, and then wrote a hatchet piece. This isn't a hatchet piece. Now, 3 years ago, my friend Richard Law, who was at the 2014 conference when I spoke about the right to bear arms, he went up to the Home Office. He gave them a copy of his book, and he met a senior Mandarin, a very posh chap, and he said, "We in the permanent civil service accept that UK firearms laws have probably reached a high point, and they're going to retract. So this could be a sign of it happening. Let's look on the bright side. On the other hand, of course, with the migrant crisis in Europe, people are arming themselves, aren't they? Most European countries, as you know, they've got the right to bear arms. You can buy pepper sprays and guns and what have you, the worst case scenario, they're going to relax on guns, and we're going to have a civil war. So it's good in parts. I don't know how to place it.
Okay, well, we'll continue to watch it, but this is a fascinating article because, of course, the BBC normally just pushes the government line. We'll come back onto this subject. The state wants more power, though. There's no doubt about that. Thank you very much to the lady that pointed out these documents. I think, Mike, you might have mentioned one of these at least in talking about Reaper. But these are documents showing the power coming into our Home Office to spy on us. So we've got covert surveillance and property interference, a very interesting expression. Property interference means the ability to come into your home or workplace. Here's the document. You can get it online, and obviously the contents there show that it's very comprehensive in what it's talking about. What we're interested in is the number of authorities that are now going to get access to the ability to spy on the public. So here we are, authorisation levels, and you can have a look through here. We've got all of the police services, Scotland, Metropolitan Police, City of London, Northern Ireland, and then we've got the Ministry of Defence and, of course, the Army, Navy, Royal Air Force, Police, National Crime Agency. But it goes on. The Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, well, of course, they need to be able to spy on you. The Department of Health needs to be able to spy on you. Home Office, Minister of Justice, the Welsh Assembly, so the government bodies, any county council or district council, if they come up with the right excuse, they can spy on you, and on it goes. So this is part of this vicious web of spying that Theresa May has built up. But here we've got the Royal Mail, which is now a limited company, private company, has also now got a commission to be able to spy on the public if somebody wants to use them to intercept your letters. Well, if you think that's it, think again, because on it goes. This is the covert human intelligence document from the Home Office. We do the same thing. Here's the content, and now have a look at who can use covert human sources, including vulnerable people, to spy on others. Here's the list again: the police, the military, the fraud office, intelligence services, DEFRA, Department of Health again, Home Office, Ministry of Justice, Welsh Assembly, the Prudential Regulation Authority is quite a good one.
That's the Bank of England.
The Bank of England, thank you, Mike. We've also got the Financial Conduct Authority.
Also the Bank of England.
We've also got the Food Standards Agent. They may need to spy on you because you're probably putting something nasty in your pasties. And the Gambling Commission and the Health and Safety Executive. They've all now got the power to spy on you. And this is the heart of it. Here's the Reaper document. Look at what it says: protection of freedoms. Well, it's nothing of the sort. This is the diagram which shows how a local council can spy and make an application to local magistrate. None of this is about protecting freedoms. It's about taking them away. And it has only been the UK column that has warned and warned and warned about this lady, Theresa May, who is building a Stasi state in front of our very eyes.
When you put the idea of smart cities in that context, it gives it a slightly different complexion to the one that Ed Vizy would like us to believe.
Well, that's absolutely right, Mike. And of course, this is the reality, that they want people in cities, because then every single aspect of their life can be monitored and watched. And if you dare to criticise the government, for example, you're going to become a dissident to go into a psychiatric unit or a special area of the city.
Okay, Syria. So it looks like a deal has been done between the US and Russia, and apparently Syria has agreed to it, but they still want the fight against terrorists such as Islamic State to continue. This is according to a Syrian Foreign Ministry source. Well, there are going to be some areas where there's a cessation of hostilities, and I would imagine those that are perhaps members of ISIS or al-Nusra Front will migrate to those areas, so perhaps this is a way of corralling them. Vladimir Putin said, we'll do whatever's necessary with Damascus, with the legitimate Syrian authorities. We're counting on the United States to do the same with its allies and the groups that it supports. And I find that little turn of phrase, the groups that it supports, quite interesting. And in the meantime, I just wanted to highlight this article from New Eastern Outlook, because we reported on the fact that Médecins Sans Frontières was claiming that the Russians had bombed one of its hospitals in Syria last week. I'm just going to read a little of what this says here. It says, accusations and denials continue to be traded between the West's NGO, Doctors Without Borders, and the Russian and Syrian governments. Despite the gravity of the accusations by the West and MSF, which suggest deliberate and egregious war crimes, they have thus far produced no evidence. Not only have they produced no evidence, they openly admit that so far they have none. And then later on it goes on to say, when the United States inexplicably bombed MSF's hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan last year, among the many statements released by MSF would include one published on their own website entitled, Afghanistan Enough, Even War Has Rules. And in it, MSF claims that this was not just an attack on our hospital, it was an attack on the Geneva Conventions. This cannot be tolerated. These conventions govern the rules of war and were established to protect civilians in conflicts, including patients, medical workers and facilities. They bring some humanity into what is otherwise an inhumane situation. The Geneva Conventions are not just an abstract legal framework, is what Neo is saying here. They are the difference between the life and death for medical teams on the front line. They are what allow patients to access health facilities safely and what allows organisations like MSF to provide healthcare without being targeted. But they then go on to point out that Article 38 of the Geneva Conventions requires that organisations display, in fact, not only display that they are a hospital, but in modern times that they go on to inform combatants in a war zone of the GPS coordinates of their hospitals. And as we reported last week, MSF didn't do that. They specifically said, we are not going to do that in order to avoid being bombed. So what this article is pointing out is that MSF understands the Geneva Conventions because they've tried to cite them in certain circumstances, and yet they have absolutely been outside those conventions with regard to their activities in Syria, and that resulted in this so-called hospital, which was probably no more than a tent, actually, being bombed. Neo asking, was this in fact a war crime in itself?
A lot of questions to be asked on this, Mike, which probably brings us in very nicely to this event.
Yeah, just want to remind everybody once again of the talk from Robert Stewart next week, next Tuesday, in Frome, on Saving Syria's Children, the Panorama propaganda piece from 2013. Please get along to that if you get a chance and support Robert and his work.
Okay. John Hurst, we'll just give you 20 seconds. What would you like to see people doing at the moment in order to stop? What is it? It's basically takeover of the UK at the moment.
Well, the council tax idea, it's starve the beast. We shouldn't be subsidising these people, and they should be called to account. And we do have powers. Politicians have, or members of the parliament do have a rule book. It's in Erskine May. You know, you heard me refer to that before. They tend to disregard it, and so some years ago, Roger Hayes wrote a document about. It was a warning to politicians, and I reread it the other day, and I can't fault it. And I think it should be circulated to the current shower. And it basically says we can see what you're doing now, and you're not going to get away with it any further. Do you recall that one?
I do, actually. Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you very much for reminding us of that
Yep.
one. We've also got the information over mortgages, but more on that in due course. John, thank you very much for joining us. That's it for today's UK Column News. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.